Okay, so um, let's unpack this. Here's a pretty mind-blowing stat for you. 70% of wealthy families, they see their fortunes just vanish by the second generation.
70%? Wow.
And hold on, it gets even snarker. That number leaps to 90% by the third. 90?
Yeah,
It's this whole shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations thing you hear about. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
it absolutely does. And the Alux.com article we looked at, Why Most Generational Wealth Disappears,
Yeah.
it really digs into that. Building wealth and, well, keeping it are just two very different skills.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that's what we're zeroing in on in this deep dive, that Alex piece. And look, whether you're, managing wealth yourself or maybe you're just fascinated by how these things work over time, this discussion is really for you. Because the ideas here about mindset, about values, planning, they're actually surprisingly relevant for almost anyone.
Right. The article gives a great framework, really, for understanding these patterns. So our goal today is to sort of pull out the key reasons this wealth erosion happens and, maybe more importantly, extract some actionable strategies, things families can actually do to try and beat those odds.
Okay, great. So let's start at the beginning then. The originals, the first generation, the ones who actually built it all. What's their story typically like?
Well, what's really striking, according to the article, is that their drive, initially, it's usually not about fancy living or luxury. It's often rooted much deeper in this need for security, a security born from having known real hardship, genuine scarcity.
Right. Exactly like the article mentions, you often see immigrants starting over or refugees fleeing something terrible, maybe people who really clawed their way out of poverty. It paints this picture where that initial push, it's necessity driving it. It's about never going back to that, not just, getting a bigger house.
Precisely. Those kinds of experiences, they forged this really powerful aversion to loss. So the focus isn't just on getting more, it's very tied up with that fear of slipping back. Think about like 19th century German and Italian immigrants working incredibly hard,
Yeah.
or Vietnamese refugees in the 80s, maybe starting small businesses, often sending money home.
You see that today too.
You do. That same kind of deep-seated frugality and intense work ethic in lots of first-generation entrepreneurs now.
It just makes sense, doesn't it? If you know what having nothing feels like, you're going to be fiercely protective of what you build. And the article talks about their habits too. It's not really about chasing quick money, is it?
No, exactly. Their approach, it tends to be marked by, well, extreme frugality sometimes, a really long-term view on investing, and a big emphasis on managing risk. They often lean towards tangible things, assets that tend to appreciate over time. Think fine art, classic cars, real estate.
Solid stuff.
Yeah. For them, wealth isn't just like a number in an account. It's more of a philosophy, really, a shield against an unpredictable world.
Okay, so that's the first generation. Sounds like they're really resilient, very driven. Then comes generation two. They inherit the wealth. They don't build it from zero. How does that change the dynamic?
Well, the core difference is really in their starting point, their foundational experience. Security isn't this thing they had to fight for. It's just normal. It's the baseline.
Ah,
So they haven't necessarily faced that same level of struggle, that same scarcity. And because of that, the urgency, that deep fear of loss that really propelled the first generation, it can often be missing.
And I guess that's where the article starts flagging the potential pitfalls. Things like maybe a sense of entitlement creeping in.
Yes, or perhaps some overconfidence.
Sure.
And there's also this complex issue the article mentions about identity, their personal identity getting tangled up with the inherited money.
Right.
And crucially, they often just haven't developed the same practical, hands-on financial know-how that the first generation picked up purely out of need. They might not fully grasp the real value of a dollar or the complexities of managing serious wealth.
The article used the Vanderbilts as an example, didn't it?
It did, yeah. A really stark historical case. Huge wealth built up, and then, poof, a pretty rapid decline within just a couple of generations.
Wow. But then you contrast that with families like, say, the Waltons from Walmart. They seem to have managed things differently.
That's a great counterpoint the article brings up. The Waltons, it notes, were really proactive. They set up things like family trusts early on, and they made it a real priority to educate the heirs, specifically about the responsibilities that come with wealth. It's a conscious effort, to push back against those risks the second generation faces.
Okay, so let's dig into why. Why does this wealth often just fade away? The article highlights a few core reasons. The first one you mentioned earlier, this loss of scarcity mindset.
Exactly. without that foundational fear of failure, that sort of ingrained discipline that the first generation had, it can just erode. The drive to protect and grow, it kind of weakens, which can lead to, well, less careful spending, riskier investment choices maybe.
And the second point the article makes is about a lack of stewardship training. I like that phrase. It makes it sound less like ownership and more like a responsibility.
That's precisely the key distinction, isn't it? If the inheritors don't learn to view the money as a resource, something to be actively managed, nurtured, passed on responsibly,
Yeah,
then it's easy to just fall into thinking of it as, an endless pot for personal spending.
right. And the final piece of that puzzle, why wealth disappears, is the lack of structures or governance. That sounds like the nuts and bolts, the practical stuff.
It really is. It covers everything from, well, not having proper estate planning set up
Okay.
to maybe not having clear family rules or guidelines around money, investments, things like that, or even just lacking a defined investment strategy.
Hmm.
Without those kinds of frameworks, financial decisions can become really haphazard. Spending can get out of control. And that long-term vision for the wealth just gets lost in the day-to-day.
Okay, so we see the problem, the patterns. What about solutions? The article lays out some key strategies for actually preserving generational wealth. Let's start with family governance and estate planning. Sounds a bit corporate.
It can sound formal, yeah, but it's absolutely vital. This means setting up legal structures, like trusts you mentioned. They help manage assets, make sure they're distributed how the family intends. The article also talks about something called a family constitution.
Okay, what's that?
Think of it like a written document. It outlines the family's core values about money, maybe how big financial decisions get made, perhaps even expectations for later generations about things like work or giving back.
Interesting.
And for really significant wealth, you might even see a dedicated family office set up just to manage investments and all the financial complexities.
And the article stressed the need for flexibility in these structures, right?
Yeah.
Which makes sense. You can't just lock everything down rigidly for decades.
Exactly. The world changes, families change. So these guidelines, they need room to adapt. What's really fascinating, though, is the example from Japan. The article mentions these 300-year family wealth plans.
300 years?
Yeah, it shows this incredible long-term thinking, meticulous planning, and a really deep commitment to preserving that family legacy over centuries.
Wow. Okay, next strategy. Financial education. Seems obvious, but I imagine it's deeper than just, teaching someone to balance a checkbook.
Oh, absolutely. It's about building a real fundamental grasp of how money actually works. Things like compounding the power of it, the risks of debt, the impact of taxes, basic investing principles.
What's fundamentals?
Right, but maybe even more critical, as the article points out, is nurturing that stewardship mindset we talked about, really instilling the understanding that they are, in a sense, temporary caretakers of this wealth. They have a responsibility to preserve it, maybe even grow it for the people who come next.
And then there's instilling values. Things like discipline, humility, service. How do these sort of softer qualities play into keeping wealth?
Well, these values, they provide the kind of ethical framework, the moral compass for how wealth gets used and managed. Discipline, obviously, helps curb impulsive spending. Humility works against that entitlement trap. It fosters responsibility. And the article makes a really smart point about getting younger generations involved in philanthropy, maybe early on,
Why philanthropy specifically?
because it helps shift the focus away from just personal consumption towards contributing to something bigger than themselves. It can instill this sense of purpose, and it's not just tied to having money.
That's a powerful idea, reframing what wealth is for. And the last strategy the article highlights is evolve, don't imitate. I like that. It suggests the next generation shouldn't just try to be a carbon copy of the founder.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, the economy shifts, industries transform. The role of the second or third generation isn't just to repeat exactly what the first one did. It's more about upholding those core values, that foundational mindset that brought success, but also being willing and able to adapt, to innovate, to apply their own skills and perspectives to managing that wealth in a changing world.
So if we really try and, boil it all down, what's the absolute core takeaway from this deep dive into why generational wealth often disappears and how to keep it?
I think the central insight, and the article puts this really well, is that generational wealth isn't primarily about the amount of money piled up. It's fundamentally about successfully passing down a mindset, a specific way of thinking about resources, responsibility, risk, and the long-term future.
Right. It's not just handing over the cash or the assets. It's about transferring the principles, the work ethic, the perspective that actually created that wealth originally.
Precisely. The families that manage to buck that trend, the ones who sustain wealth for multiple generations, they're the ones who really grasp this. They allow their legacy to evolve, to adapt, sure, but they stay deeply connected to those core psychological drivers, that discipline, that frugality, that long-term view that fueled the founder's success way back when.
Hmm. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Really consider your own relationship with resources. What are the core values driving your decisions, financial or otherwise? Whether you're, building something now, maybe you've inherited something, or you're just watching how this plays out, what kind of mindset are you cultivating? And what values are you passing on, maybe without even realizing it?
Yeah.
Because this isn't just about dollars and cents, is it? It's about the legacy of your principles, your perspective. Definitely gives you something to think about.